I thought I was doing the right thing when I handed Daniel the spare key. I thought I was being a good aunt. I thought, at 64 years old, that I had finally learned how to read people. I was wrong about all three, but I wasn't wrong about what I did next. My name is Dorothy, and for 22 years, I lived alone in the house my late husband Gerald and I built together, not just the structure, but the life inside it. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a kitchen where I learned to make his mother's peach cobbler because it made him smile so wide his eyes disappeared. When Gerald passed 7 years ago, the house didn't feel empty so much as it felt like a museum of everything we'd been. I kept it. I tended it. I planted new roses along the south fence because living things need tending even when your heart doesn't feel like it. I have one brother, Martin, who lives in Phoenix. He calls twice a year, Christmas and my birthday, and both calls are exactly 12 minutes long. I have never told him how I know this because it would embarrass him, and I have no interest in embarrassing the people I love. Martin has a son named Daniel, my nephew, who is 31 years old and has his father's jawline and his mother's absolute confidence that the world was arranged specifically for his convenience. I adored Daniel when he was small. He used to fall asleep on my couch watching old movies, his sneakers still on, his mouth slightly open. There was something so trusting about a child who sleeps in your house. I kept a blanket folded on the armrest of that couch for 17 years, for exactly that reason. Daniel married Cassandra 4 years ago. I flew to the wedding. I bought them a stand mixer and a set of good knives, because I believe in giving practical gifts to young couples. Cassandra was beautiful in the way certain women are beautiful, deliberately, architecturally, as if beauty were a strategy rather than a fact. She kissed my cheek at the reception and said, "Daniel talks about you all the time." I believed her. That was my first mistake. The call came on a Tuesday in early March, 2 years ago. Daniel's voice had that careful quality I'd learned to recognize in people about to ask for something large. "Aunt Dorothy," he said, "things have gotten a little complicated here." Complicated, he explained over the next 40 minutes, meant that the tech startup he'd invested their savings into had quietly folded. It meant they'd been living off Cassandra's income from her part-time consulting work, which was apparently less stable than either of them had let on. It meant they were 3 months behind on the rent for their apartment in Atlanta, and their landlord was not a patient man. "Just until we get back on our feet," Daniel said. 6 months, 8 months at the most. "I want to be honest with you about something." I did not say yes immediately. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear and I looked around my kitchen at the blue curtains I'd sewn myself, at the ceramic rooster on the windowsill that Gerald had found at a flea market and presented to me like it was the Mayan gold, and I felt the particular loneliness of a woman who has too much space and not enough people in it. 6 months, I said. 8 at the most. "You're the best, Aunt Dorothy. Seriously, you're the best person I know." I should have recognized that as the thing people say when they need something from the best person they know. Instead, I made up the guest room with the good sheets and drove to Costco and bought enough groceries to feed a small army, because that's what I do when someone is coming. I prepare. They arrived on a Thursday with 11 boxes, 2 suitcases, a stationary bike, and a dog they had not mentioned. The dog was named Biscuit. He was a large, enthusiastic golden retriever who believed with his whole heart that my rose garden was a personal gift to him. I found this out on day 2, when I looked out the kitchen window and watched him systematically excavate a bush I had been nurturing for 4 years. When I mentioned it to Cassandra, she tilted her head at a sympathetic angle and said, "Oh no, he does that sometimes. He's a digger." Then she poured herself a cup of the coffee I had made and went back to the living room. She did not offer to replant the roses. The thought did not appear to occur to her. I want to tell you the deterioration happened slowly, because that's what makes a story believable. But the truth is, it happened with remarkable efficiency. Within 3 weeks, Cassandra had rearranged my kitchen cabinets for better flow, she said, though she cooked approximately 4 times in the first 2 months. Within 5 weeks, her skincare products had migrated from the guest bathroom to my bathroom, arranged on the shelf where I kept my reading glasses and Gerald's old shaving kit that I had never moved. Within 2 months, she was hosting her book club in my living room on the first Wednesday of every month. 8 women who arrived with wine and opinions and left my throw pillows in arrangements I did not choose. Daniel worked from my home office. This was fine in the beginning. Less fine when he began referring to it as the office rather than your office. A subtle shift that I noticed, and he did not. He was on calls constantly, rebuilding something, always rebuilding something, the details of which were never entirely clear to me. He was cheerful and helpful when he walked through a room, and distracted and slightly impatient when I needed the desk. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself family means absorbing some disruption. I told myself I was not a person who made scenes. The thing about not making scenes is that other people notice. They begin to calibrate their behavior to your silence. By month 4, I was doing their laundry, not because anyone asked me to, at least not directly. It started because I was doing mine, and their hamper was overflowing, and I am constitutionally incapable of walking past a problem I can solve. Cassandra thanked me warmly the first time. The second time, she thanked me slightly less warmly. By the 5th time, she did not mention it at all, which told me everything I needed to know about whose problem the laundry had become. By month 6, I was cooking dinner 5 nights a week. Cassandra had a sensitivity to gluten that she had not mentioned before moving in, which meant I researched and adjusted and shopped accordingly. Daniel was particular about sodium after reading something online, which I accommodated without complaint. The one night I made my standard pot roast, the one Gerald had requested for every birthday for 20 years. Cassandra made a face at the table and said she'd probably just have some toast. I carried my pot roast back to the kitchen and stood at the counter and ate it alone. The 6 months passed. Then the 8 months. I did not bring this up, partly because I am not confrontational, and partly because every time I considered saying something, Daniel would come home with flowers from the grocery store, or Cassandra would suggest we watch a movie together, and I would swallow whatever I'd been about to say. I understood, by month 10, that I had trained them. Every time I said nothing, I told them that nothing needed to be said. Every kindness I performed without being asked became an expectation. I had done this to myself as surely as Biscuit had done it to my rose garden, and the roses were still not replanted. The discovery happened on a Monday. I was not snooping. I want to be clear about this because it matters to me, even though I suppose it doesn't matter to the story. I was looking for the folder where I keep my homeowner's insurance documents because my agent had called asking me to confirm some updated coverage details. I went to the filing cabinet in the home office, my filing cabinet in my home office, and I found the folder, and inside the folder, behind my insurance papers, was a document I did not recognize. It was a loan agreement, a home equity line of credit application, my home equity, my address, my property details listed with the precision of someone who had looked them up deliberately, and at the bottom, a signature line. Not my signature. The name filled in neatly, in blue ink, was Cassandra's. I stood in that office for a long time, long enough that the light changed, long enough that Biscuit came and sat on my foot, which he did when he sensed a shift in the room's atmosphere. I scratched his ear automatically because my hands needed something to do while my brain sorted through what I was looking at. She had not succeeded. I could see that much. There were rejection stamps on 2 of the pages, notes about missing documentation, a letter from the institution explaining that without the property owner's signature, they could not proceed. But she had tried. She had gathered my documents, copied them, researched the process, prepared an application, and attempted to borrow against my house without my knowledge. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. Without a word. I put the document back exactly as I found it. I found my insurance folder. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea and sat at the table where I had eaten thousands of meals, and I thought about what I was going to do. Here is what I decided not to do. I decided not to confront Cassandra that evening. Not because I was afraid of her, but because a woman who attempts something like that doesn't fold under confrontation, she adapts. She has a story prepared. She cries, or she gets indignant, or she involves Daniel in a way that turns me into the problem. I had watched enough of my friends navigate difficult situations to know that the person who maintains the element of surprise maintains the power. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Patricia, and I have known her for 19 years, and she is the kind of woman who responds to extraordinary information with a very slight raising of her left eyebrow and then immediately begins solving the problem. "Don't say anything," she told me. "Don't change your behavior. Come in Thursday." I did not say anything. I did not change my behavior. I made dinner that night, baked salmon, roasted asparagus, the kind of meal Cassandra photographed for her Instagram. And I sat at the table with both of them, and I listened to Daniel talk about a new venture he was exploring, and I smiled at the right moments, and inside I was still and cold and absolutely clear. Thursday came. I told them I had a doctor's appointment and drove to Patricia's office instead. In the weeks that followed, I learned several things I had not previously known. I learned that what Cassandra had attempted was, depending on how the paperwork had been filled out, potentially fraud. I learned that my home's title was secure and that her application had left a paper trail that Patricia photographed and filed with considerable satisfaction. I learned that Daniel's name appeared nowhere on the application, though whether that meant he didn't know or simply that he was careful, I could not yet determine. I also learned, through a conversation with Martin, who I finally called, who was on the phone for 26 minutes, a personal record that Daniel and Cassandra had told his parents they were house-sitting for me while I sorted out some personal matters. They had been telling this story for months. My brother had sent them a grocery gift card as a thank you. I had one more decision to make. Cassandra had a sister named Priya, who lived in Seattle, and whom Cassandra spoke about constantly: her interior design projects, her perfect apartment, her upcoming 40th birthday party. Cassandra had been planning to fly out for it. She mentioned this in mid-October, and when she did, her eyes went a little bright, the way they did when she was thinking about something she wanted. "Of course," I said. "That sounds lovely." She booked a 4-day trip. Daniel was going with her. They would leave on a Thursday and return on Sunday. The following Wednesday evening, I made pot roast. I set the table with the good dishes. I opened a bottle of wine that Gerald and I had been saving for no particular reason, which meant it had been sitting in the rack for 7 years, waiting for a moment worth opening it for. I decided this was that moment. We ate together, the three of us, and Cassandra told me about Priya's apartment, and Daniel talked about Seattle's coffee scene, and I listened and smiled and refilled their glasses. After dinner, while they were watching something in the living room, I washed the dishes slowly, the way I do when I want to think. I dried each plate and put it back in the cabinet, my cabinet, the original arrangement, the one that had made sense to me for 22 years. The next morning, I was up before either of them. I made coffee. I walked around my house, through the living room where Cassandra's book club met, past the office where Daniel took his calls, out to the back garden where Biscuit had dismantled half my landscaping, and I said goodbye to the version of my life that had tried to make space for people who had taken space without asking. I drove them to the airport. "You sure you'll be okay alone all weekend?" Daniel asked, pulling his suitcase from my trunk. "Completely sure," I said. Cassandra kissed my cheek. Her perfume was expensive and it lingered. "We'll bring you something from Pike Place," she said. "You don't have to," I said, which was true in more ways than she understood. I watched them walk through the automatic doors, and then I drove home and I called the locksmith. By noon that day, every lock in my house had been changed. The locksmith, a quiet man named Ted, who had rekeyed this house twice before for far less interesting reasons, handed me my new keys without comment. I appreciated that. By 2 o'clock, I had placed everything that belonged to Daniel and Cassandra, every item, every box, every skincare product, Biscuit's dog bed, the stationary bike in the garage, organized by room of origin. I am a thorough person. I did not miss anything. By 4 o'clock, Patricia had sent certified letters to both their phones and to Martin's address in Phoenix, formally notifying them that their occupancy of my property had ended, that their belongings were secured in the garage and available for retrieval by appointment, and that the garage access code would be provided upon confirmation that they had arranged alternative housing. Attached to the letter was a summary of the equity loan application, included for reference. I then drove to the garden center and bought 2 new rose bushes. My phone rang at 7:42 that evening. It was Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 7:44. I let that go too. At 7:51, he left a message that I listened to while sitting on my porch with the last of the wine from Gerald's bottle. His voice moved through several registers, confused, then urgent, then tight with something that might have been shame or might have been anger. I couldn't entirely tell. He said there must be some misunderstanding. He said they had nowhere to stay. He said Priya's apartment wasn't big enough. He said, "Aunt Dorothy, come on, this isn't like you." I sat with that for a while. This isn't like you. As if the person I had been for 2 years, the woman who cooked and laundered and adjusted and accommodated and said nothing while her home was rearranged around her, as if that was the real me. As if this Dorothy, sitting on her own porch in the October evening, with a good glass of wine and clean new locks on every door, was some aberration. I thought about calling him back. I genuinely did. Not because I had changed my mind, but because I am, at my core, someone who believes in communication. I thought about what I would say. I thought about the document in my filing cabinet. I thought about Cassandra's signature on a line that should have held mine. I did not call him back. Martin called the next morning. His call lasted 41 minutes, which told me he was genuinely distressed, because Martin only exceeds 12 minutes when something has broken through his composure. He cycled through the same registers as Daniel: confusion, then negotiation, then a kind of bewildered grievance that his son was stranded in Seattle. I let him talk. When he was finished, I said, "Martin, your son's wife attempted to take out a loan against my house without my knowledge or consent. I have the documentation. I have an attorney. I love your son, and I am not pressing charges. But he cannot live in my home." The silence that followed was the longest silence I have heard from my brother in my entire life. "She did what?" he said. "I'll email you the documents Patricia prepared," I said. "Then you'll understand." He did not call Daniel a good boy after that. He did not suggest there was a misunderstanding. He said, very quietly, "Dorothy, I'm so sorry." And because Martin is not a man who apologizes easily or often, I believed him. Daniel and Cassandra stayed in Seattle 4 extra days while they arranged their situation. I know this because Priya called me, unexpectedly, on the second day. She had found out what happened. She was not calling to defend her sister. She was calling to say she was sorry on behalf of her family and that she had read the documents Martin had forwarded and she was embarrassed. "She's always done things like this," Priya said, in the tone of someone who has spent a lifetime cleaning up after a particular kind of chaos. I should have warned Daniel before they got married. I did not know what to do with that information, so I simply said, "Thank you for calling," and meant it. They retrieved their things from my garage on a Tuesday, by appointment via a moving company Daniel had hired. I was not home. I had chosen to be at my friend Maxine's house for lunch, eating her excellent chicken salad and telling her the entire story, which she received with the focused attention of a woman who had been waiting for this particular narrative for approximately 20 months. "I knew that girl was trouble," Maxine said. "The first time you told me about the cabinet rearranging, you didn't say anything." "Dorothy," she said, "you already knew." She was right. That's the thing nobody tells you about these situations. You know earlier than you admit. You know, in the cabinet rearranging, in the laundry that becomes yours, in the pot roast you carry back to the kitchen alone. You know. You just haven't yet decided what knowing obligates you to do. I have been asked by Maxine, by Patricia, by my neighbor Ruth, who heard some version of things, whether I feel guilty, whether, in the quiet of my house, now that it's mine again, there are moments where I wonder if I was too harsh, whether I should have given them a warning, a deadline, some formal notice before the locks changed. I have thought about this honestly. I sit on my porch in the evenings, where the new roses are doing better than I expected, and I think about it. Here is what I know. I gave them time. 22 months of time. I gave them patience and groceries and the good sheets and a kitchen that I adapted to their dietary preferences and a home office and 5 dinners a week and an adjustment to every corner of my daily life. I gave them the benefit of every doubt I had. I gave Daniel the trust I'd been building since he was a child, sleeping on my couch with his shoes still on. And Cassandra had taken my property documents out of my filing cabinet and attempted to borrow money against my house. There is no version of that story where I owed her a warning. Daniel and I spoke once, about 3 weeks after they left. He called on a Sunday evening, and I answered this time. He sounded tired in a way that was new to him, not the performed weariness of someone who wants sympathy, but the genuine exhaustion of a person who has recently had to look at themselves clearly and found the view uncomfortable. He did not defend Cassandra. "I want to give him that. I didn't know about the loan thing," he said. "I want you to believe that. I'm considering it," I said, which was honest. "I should have," he stopped, started again. "I should have paid more attention to what she was doing, to what you were doing for us, to a lot of things. I did not tell him it was fine, because it wasn't fine, and he didn't need the comfort of my absolution in that moment. He needed to sit with what had happened. I believe that discomfort, when it is earned and appropriate, is one of the most useful experiences a person can have. It is how we build the discernment to do better. "I love you, Daniel," I said instead. "That has not changed. It will not change." "I don't deserve that right now," he said. "No," I agreed. "But it's still true. We talk occasionally now. Not every week. There is still a distance that we are both navigating, and I think we both understand it will take time to rebuild." He and Cassandra are living in an apartment in Atlanta. He is working again, something more stable this time. I do not ask about her, and he does not elaborate. I made some other changes in the months that followed. I joined a Thursday evening book club my own, with women I chose, meeting in my living room on my schedule. I replanted the south garden entirely, bigger this time, extending the beds along both fences. I booked a 10-day trip to Portugal for the spring, which Gerald and I had always meant to take and never did, and which I intend to take in his honor and my own delight. I also updated my will, which Patricia had been gently suggesting I do for several years. The house goes to a land trust. The details are not dramatic. It was simply a thing that needed doing, and I had been putting it off in the way that people put off the paperwork of their own mortality, and now it's done. Some people, when I tell this story, say I should have acted sooner, and they're right. The first time Cassandra rearranged my cabinets, I should have rearranged them back. The first time I did their laundry without being asked, I should have knocked on their door and handed it to them unfolded. The first time I carried my pot roast back to the kitchen alone, I should have served it at the table and said clearly that dietary sensitivities require advance notice, and advance notice is a courtesy that goes in both directions. I didn't do any of those things because I believed, at some fundamental level, that keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family. That my silence was a form of generosity. It wasn't. It was a form of miseducation. I taught them. Every single day I said nothing, that this was what I cost nothing, that my home, my labor, my patience, my space were simply resources available for claiming. You do teach people how to treat you. Every action and inaction is a lesson. I taught a bad one for 22 months. And then I changed the curriculum. My house smells like itself again. Coffee in the morning and old books and the faint cedar from the closets and, when the wind comes from the south, the roses Gerald would have liked very much. I am 64 years old. I live alone, and I do not experience it as loneliness. I experience it as possession of my time, my space, my kitchen cabinets, in the arrangement that makes sense to me, my evenings on the porch, my life. Biscuit, for what it's worth, apparently thrives in the Atlanta apartment. Daniel sent me a photo once the dog on a small balcony, looking deeply satisfied. I was glad. I had never had anything against Biscuit. He was just a dog doing what dogs do. He dug where there was soft earth, and nobody stopped him. I stopped him, and then I planted something better in his place.